In the year 524, in a cell at Pavia, the most honored man in the kingdom of Italy sat waiting to be executed. His name was Anicius Manlius Severinus Boethius. He'd been the consul. His two sons had been consuls together in a single year, a distinction so rare that Boethius wept with joy at the sight. He was the master of offices under Theodoric, the Ostrogoth king, and he was the second man in the realm. And then, overnight, an accusation of treason, that he had conspired to defend the Senate, that he had trafficked in forbidden letters. He was condemned without a hearing, his property seized, his name blacklisted in the very city that had crowned him. They carried him north and shut him in a tower to await the executioner, who would bind a cord about his skull, tighten it until his eyes started to bulge from his head. They strangled him, they hung him, and they beat him with a club until he died. And there, in that cell, he didn't curse, he wrote. He begins as a broken man does in self-pity. He fills the page with mournful verses, and the muses of poetry crowd around the bed to feed his grief. Then a presence enters the room, a woman of awful and uncertain stature, who seems now of human height, and now to touch the heavens, her robe woven by her own hands, and torn at the hem by the careless. This is Lady Philosophy. She drives the weeping muses out like harlots from a sick room, and she sits beside the prisoner to reason with him. What has undone you, she asks. Is that you trusted fortune? And then she lets fortune herself speak in her own defense. Why do you cry out against me, mortal? What have I taken from you that was ever truly yours? I turn the wheel that spins. It's my delight to bring low what is high and to raise up what is low. Mount up, if it pleases you, but on this condition, that you will not count it as an injury to come down again when the rule of my game requires it. You came naked into my power. I have clothed you. Do not complain when I strip you bare. The one thing I have never promised you is that the wheel would stop. The wheel that lifts and lowers, indifferent, sovereign over kings and slaves alike. Boethius, the pagan-trained Christian, looks at the wheel from inside the prison and asks the oldest question a righteous sufferer can ask. Is anything ruling the wheel, or is the wheel the ruler? His whole book is the answer, that beneath blind fortune runs the steady hand of providence, and that the apparent fall is, to that eye that can see, the very path of ascent. Now we turn back 14 centuries to another innocent man in a cell. He too had risen, sold into a foreign house, set over all his master owned. He too was condemned without a hearing. On the word of an accuser, he couldn't answer. And he too went down to the prison and to the place that the text calls bur, the pit, the same word that the name dry cistern his brothers went through him to, a pit. Joseph had been on the wheel his entire life, the favored son, then the slave, the trusted steward, then the prisoner. And Genesis dares to whisper again and again the thing Boethius spent a lifetime arguing. The Lord was with him. The wheel turns, but it's not the wheel that rules.
Hey everyone, welcome.
Hey, is that the Fonz? Hey.
Welcome to another episode of Covenants and Kingdoms. I am your co-host Brad, along with...
Hey, I'm Nathan. How you doing? Nice to see you.
And we are continuing our look at, well, the ancient Egyptian culture.
Yeah.
But then
we'll finish that.
We'll be rolling into
Genesis 39, actually.
Yeah. So thank you guys for joining us. But first, as always, we're brought to you by Baba Java Coffee, located in Birmingham, Alabama. We are a specialty coffee roaster focusing on excellence from farm to cup. And we also have 3 cafes in the area. So, but if you want some coffee for your home, office, whatever, just go to babajavacoffee.com and use the discount code Covenants at checkout, and you will receive a discount on your order.
Not only that, Brad, But if you order 100 pounds of coffee,
100 only.
Yeah, it's only 100.
Wow.
100 pounds. Brad Haynes himself will ride with the tunic on, with Lady Philosophy at his side, riding the wheel to your house.
Riding the wheel.
Whatever riding the wheel means, that's what he will be doing. The wheel is turning, and Brad will be riding it all the way to your front door, delivering 100 pounds of coffee.
How will that tunic stay on while I have to pin it?
That's not my problem.
That's true. Wow, that sounds interesting. As long as Lady Philosophy is my wife, then we'll...
Well, yes.
Which it could be. She's wisdomous.
Okay.
So, all right. So let's get into it.
All right. We went through briefly, again, there's volumes and courses and libraries and filled with Egyptian history. It's fascinating. I mean, it's fascinating. It's unique in the world. So we briefly covered all of Egyptian history up to the time of the patriarchs. Okay. So hopefully we'll conclude that today. We'll talk a little bit about Egyptian religion. We touched on it through each of the kingdoms, but we'll talk about religion, worldview at the time of the patriarchs. So you can't discuss Genesis or Exodus without knowing the background of the religion and the religious beliefs of the Egyptians. The biblical texts presuppose these religious beliefs. They polemicize against it. Remember, polemic is just an argument against. Type of using the words as an argument, your own thoughts, beliefs, arguments as an argument against. They borrow from it. They subvert it all at once. So we have to look at some of these structures. So the cosmogony.
I've never seen that.
So the cosmogony and the primeval cosmogony and the primeval mound. So they had several theological systems kind of all at once, and they didn't regard all of these as mutually exclusive. Okay. The Heliopolitan cosmogony begins with Nun, the primordial dark waters, okay, from which emerges a single self-created creator god, Atum, the all or the complete one, often identified or merged into Re, eventually the sun god. Atum stands on the primeval mound, the Benben, prefiguring the obelisk and the pyramid, and produces by his own act, variously described as sneezing, speech, emitting, the first divine pair, Shu, which is air, Tefnut, moisture. These produce Geb, earth, and Nut, sky, who in turn produce the four great deities, Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. This is the Heliopolitan Ennead, the group of nine. Okay? You'll hear that term. The Memphite cosmogony, preserved on the Shabaka stone, which is a 25th dynasty copy of what claims to be a much older text, places Ta, a craftsman god of Memphis, at the origin of all things. Ta creates by thought and speech. He conceives in his heart and speaks with his tongue, and the word comes into being. This is conceptually parallel with Genesis 1. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. Genesis 1:3. It's well known, and scholars from Juncker forward have debated the direction of influence. So obviously, more conservative people like us believe the Bible influenced these things. The biblical story influenced these things. Skeptical people will say, oh, no, the Bible was influenced by these. So, people debate that.
Yeah.
There's no debate to us. But,
no.
The Memphite theology is at a minimum evidence that the ancient world knew of cosmogonies in which the divine word, which we've talked about many, many times before and will continue, rather than divine combat like the Enuma Elish, is the principle. Okay? So the word, the divine word, spoke and created. Again, that's the Hebrew Machaye. That's the concept of Hebrew Machaye, bringing to life. From the Hadavar, the word, right?
Yeah, correct.
The Hermopolitan cosmogony works with Ogdod, a set of 8 primeval deities arranged in 4 pairs: Nun, Naunet, He, and Hauhet, Kek, and Kauket, Amun, and Amaunet. Primeval water, infinity, darkness, hiddenness. And the Theban theology elevates Amun to supreme creator, eventually merging him with Re. Okay. The point is that Egyptian theology was simultaneously polytheistic and then trending towards henotheistic or even quasi-monotheistic statements in certain priestly traditions. The 14th century Amarna revolution under Akhenaten, with his exclusive devotion to Aten, did not appear out of nowhere. The conceptual resources for it had been developing in Egyptian thought for centuries. Okay. So we have moments of quasi-monotheism in Egyptian theology, and that's not, it just didn't just happen out of nowhere. It kind of developed, okay, over time. And then it went back to polytheism. Osiris, resurrection, and judgment. The myth of Osiris is the central narrative of Egyptian religious imagination. Osiris, the good king, is murdered and dismembered by his jealous brother Set. Then reassembled and revivified, he's not fully resurrected to life, by his wife Isis. Their son Horus avenges his father in a long mythic struggle with Set, eventually winning the kingship. Osiris becomes ruler of the dead. Horus rules the living, and every pharaoh in life is Horus, and in death becomes Osiris. The dead are judged before Osiris in the Hall of Two Truths. The heart is weighed against the feather of Ma'at. Those found righteous join Osiris in the field of reeds, while those found wanting are devoured by Amit, the eater of the dead. You don't want to be, you don't want to meet Amit.
Sounds terrible.
This is no peripheral matter. The Egyptian afterlife is morally inflected. Actions in this life determine the fate in the next. And their criteria are specified in the negative confession of the Book of the Dead, in which the deceased denies before Osiris a series of moral violations. I have not killed, I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not committed adultery, I have not blasphemed, I have not oppressed the poor. The parallels with the 10 Commandments, the Decalogue, and with Levitical ethics are obvious, and they should be neither sensationalized, as if Moses borrowed from Egypt, nor minimized, as Egyptian ethics were non-existent, right?
Yeah.
The ancient Near East shared a broad moral vocabulary. The biblical contribution is the rooting of that vocabulary in a covenant relationship with God who acts in history. Okay?
Makes sense.
These are not vacuums.
No, of course not.
These people, we talked about how they interacted, they moved back and forth, they lived. I mean, the biblical story shows about how they lived together.
Yeah.
So, they would know each other's religious values and beliefs. And so these things aren't in vacuums, and, they didn't influence each other or have similar language to each other.
Yeah.
They did. Again, so that people can understand what God is trying to communicate. That's how God communicates things in ways that we can understand. Jesus continued that in parables and things like that.
Yes.
Okay. Pharaoh as God. We've heard about this. And when we get to the Moses story, the Exodus story, we'll go through this a lot. We'll probably have a whole episode about how, at least half episode about how the confrontation between Moses and Pharaoh is really God versus the Egyptian gods. It's really the Lord's son versus Re's son.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. We'll talk about that. The Pharaoh in Egyptian theology is not merely a religious figure. He is a god. In life, he is the embodiment of Horus. In death, he becomes Osiris. He's called the son of Re, and his role is to maintain Ma'at, truth, order, justice, and the proper functioning of the cosmos on behalf of the gods. Without the king, Ma'at fails, and Isfet, disorder, falsehood, chaos breaks in. The Pharaoh's daily rituals in the temples are the means by which the world is held together. This understanding stands behind every biblical encounter with Pharaoh. When Moses confronts Pharaoh in Exodus, he's not merely confronting a human ruler, but a divine claimant. The plagues are not random natural disasters, but targeted assaults on specific Egyptian gods. The Nile turned to blood challenges Hapi, the inundation god. The plague of frogs targets Heket, the frog goddess of fertility. The death of livestock attacks the bull coats of Apis and Menevis. The plague of darkness assaults Re himself, and the death of the firstborn, including Pharaoh's own son, strikes at the divine succession at the heart of Egyptian theology. The Exodus is, in the language in the text, itself an act of judgment on all the gods of Egypt, Exodus 12:12. To read it without knowing what those gods claim to be is to miss most of what the narrative is trying to represent. Okay? Okay. Biblical correlation. So we're going to talk about placing Abraham and Joseph. When did the patriarchs, including Abraham and Joseph, happen in history? Okay? We believe that the biblical narratives are true things that happened.
Yes.
God gives them to us. The people pass them down. All right, so listen. Again, we've talked about this many times. Did Moses just sit down and write out this story exactly as it appeared in the Torah, the Pentateuch? No, he just didn't. Okay, they didn't have computers to write stuff on. They didn't have paper to write stuff on. Right. I mean, papyrus type things did exist, but they were very rare, especially with nomadic peoples like the Hebrews would be.
There'd been no way for them to preserve them.
And if you had a papyrus, and when you're wandering through the desert for 40 years, how are you gonna?
It's not going to be preserved. There's no way.
So anyway, they were oral tradition people. So they passed things along orally. So the stories of these things were passed along orally, and then starting in about 1000 BC, they started to write and codify these things. Okay. Down through the post-exilic time.
Yep.
So, it's a process of actually codifying and writing these things down. And maybe we'll talk someday about how we believe the Old Testament came to be in the current form that it is. All right. It's fascinating to some people. It is to me.
I think it's really cool.
Okay. The chronological question. Where within the Egyptian timeline, which we've just talked about, do the patriarchal narratives belong? The question is contested, but the contestation operates with fairly well-defined limits, okay? So we'll talk about the conservative view, which is the traditional conservative view, which is the early Exodus, okay? So working backward from the Exodus, 1 Kings 6:1 places the Exodus 480 years before the fourth year of Solomon's reign, okay? That fourth year is conventionally dated to 967, 966 BC, yielding an Exodus date of approximately 1446 BC. Okay? 1450 is the round term that we use. This is the early date favored by conservative scholarship, including Kitchen, Wood, Bimson, Merrill, and many evangelical commentators. Adding the 430 years of Israel's stay in Egypt, Exodus 1240, yields a descent of Jacob's family in approximately 1876 BC in the late 12th dynasty under the reign of Senuseret III, or Amenemhat III. Joseph's elevation to vizier, Genesis 41, would have occurred about 30 years before that, about 1885 BC. Okay?
I don't know why I've always thought it was even later, but when you look at the actual dates, it's interesting that.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that. A lot of people now believe it's the later 1250 date. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. Abraham, born 290 years before Jacob, enters Egypt, Genesis chronology, would belong to about 2166 BC on this scheme, the late first intermediate period, or the 11th dynasty. Abraham's descent into Egypt, that Genesis 12, would be in the early to middle 12th dynasty, maybe under Amenemhat I, or Senuseret I. Okay, so we just said Joseph's would have been the third of those two exact people. The first of those, that same name, would have been in Abraham's time. Okay, which makes sense. I mean, it's his grandson, right? Or his great-grandson.
Great-grandson, that's right, yeah.
Okay, so that's the conservative date. Okay, which was held for a very long time, according to what the biblical dates say. All right, the late date for Exodus, favored by Albright, Redford, Myers, and many mainstream scholars, places the Exodus in the 13th century BC, about 1260, in the reign of Ramses II. The 480 years of 1 Kings 6:1 is interpreted as a symbolic number, 12 generations of 40 years, which is a typological figure, right? On this view, the descent into Egypt falls around 1690 BC in the 13th dynasty or the early Hyksos period, and Joseph's vizierate occurs around 1720 BC, comfortably within the area of the Asiatic ascendancy in the Delta, the Hyksos era. Okay?
Okay.
Most people nowadays assume that date, the later date.
And see the generations as symbolic.
Yes.
Not literal.
Not literally 480 exact years. Again, is there biblical precedence for
Yes.
using symbolic numbers, not exact numbers?
100%.
Yes, not just biblical precedence, A&E precedence.
Yeah,
So in
exactly.
other literature, they do the same exact thing. Okay?
We see it in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew. It's not exact.
It's not exact times. It's
Yep.
symbolic numbers or approximate numbers,
Yep.
things like that. So, that's, you can still be conservative, believe the Bible's true, and
of
believe
course.
those things.
Of course.
Right? That's what I believe. I think that's, I would
I
hold
lean
closer to
towards those dates as well.
because the Hyksos, Joseph entering in the Hyksos period makes more sense because they would be Semitic Semitic people or more familiar with Semitic peoples than the traditional Egyptian people. They'll be more willing to let him be the vizier because they're another Semitic type person than a traditional Egyptian person.
Right.
I would think.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of people believe that. Okay. A third, more radical option is Roll's, David Roll, New Chronology, which lowers Egyptian dates by 250 to 300 years, placing Joseph in the late 12th dynasty, according to a wholly revised framework. He makes intriguing claims. He identifies a tomb at Avaris containing a Syrian-style statue of an Asiatic dignitary as Joseph's own. But his proposals require systematic revision of multiple independent chronological systems, Assyrian, Babylonian, astronomical, and many others, and have not been widely accepted by Egyptologists or biblical scholars. They remain stimulating to consider, but should not be relied upon as a foundation for teaching. For our purposes, the early date scheme, Joseph is the most defensible reading and the only one we'll use here, even though I believe it's probably the later date. We'll just use that because that's the traditional view. Okay. It doesn't really matter.
No, it doesn't in the end. No, it doesn't matter.
But so we'll just go with it. It allows the biblical chronological date to function naturally, fits into the archaeological picture of Asiatic presence in the Delta in the appropriate period, and avoids the methodological difficulties of revised chronologies.
I mean, that last one for sure, we're not going to. That one seems outlandish, but
right. Okay, Abraham in Egypt, Genesis 12, 10 through 20. Let's go ahead and read that.
Now there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful, and when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for her sake he dealt well with Abram, and he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go. And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had.
Abraham's descent in Egypt during a famine in Canaan fits naturally into the 12th dynasty. We've already seen that the Asiatic presence in the eastern delta is well documented from at least Senusret II onward, and that Beni Hassan the Beni Hassan caravan painting from 1890 BC shows precisely the kind of pastoralist family group movement into Egypt that Genesis describes. The narrative's anxiety about Sarah's beauty and the Pharaoh's appropriation of her into his harem reflects authentic Egyptian royal practice. Mm-hmm. Middle Kingdom pharaohs maintained large harems, and the acquisition of foreign women through trade and tribute is well attested. The plagues that striped the household of Pharaoh in Genesis 12:17 are not explained, but the pattern of divine protection of the patriarch in a foreign court is established here and will recur in the Joseph narrative. Mm. One small detail, the Genesis 12:16 lists the gifts Pharaoh gives Abram: sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys, and camels. The mention of camels has long been a flashpoint, with some scholars insisting that domesticated camels were not in use during this period. The picture has shifted considerably. Camel bones from the Middle Bronze Age sites in the Levant and Egyptian iconographic evidence, camel figurines and depictions, show that domesticated camels, while not common, were known and used in this period. The biblical detail is not anachronistic, but precise. Joseph in Egypt, Genesis 37:39 through 50. Okay, we're not going to read that's a lot, 39 through 50. We're not going to read all that right now. We'll read it as we go along.
Of course.
The Joseph cycle is the most extended ancient Near Eastern narrative of an Asiatic rising to high office in the Egyptian state, and its details have been examined with extraordinary care by Egyptologists. A lot of Egyptologists during the scholarly era were Christian, so they look at the Bible from a biblical worldview. Mm-hmm. Even if they don't look at it with a conservative worldview, even if they were more skeptical, they still have that biblical worldview and rely on the Hebrew Scriptures, so it makes sense. The cumulative picture is one of striking authenticity. The price paid for Joseph by the Ishmaelites, Midianites, 20 shekels of silver, that's from Genesis 37:28, is the standard price for a male slave in the early 2nd millennium BC. By the New Kingdom, the price had risen to 30 or more shekels. The figure of 20 places the narrative in the Middle Kingdom or Second Intermediate Kingdom. The names of the principal Egyptians: Potiphar, the one whom Ray has given; Asenath, belonging to the goddess Nate; Potiphar, again, priest of On; and Zaphanath Paneah, Joseph's Egyptian name, the God speaks and he lives, or something close to that, are authentically Egyptian in form, though the specific name, Zaphanath Paneah, fits best in a later period, like New Kingdom or Third Intermediate, prompting the suggestion that the biblical text preserves the name in a slightly modernized form, such as we might to King Charles I, rather than than the strictly 17th century spelling. Okay, we do that all the time. Yeah. On the city of Potiphar's priesthood in the Egyptian, the great cult center of Re, later called Heliopolis by the Greeks, in the southern delta. Joseph's title is given variously as overseer of the household in Potiphar's house, then over all the lands of Egypt, Genesis 41:43, over my house, Genesis 41:40, and father to Pharaoh, lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt, in 45:8. The title father to Pharaoh, Itniter, Father of the God, is an authentic Middle and New Kingdom designation for highest officials. The position Joseph occupies most closely resembles the Egyptian vizier, right? The chief administrator of the state, second only to Pharaoh, which is exactly kind of what the Bible says. Joseph's investiture in Genesis 41 through 43 contains a string of authentic Egyptian elements: the signet ring, the seal of the office, the garment of fine linen, the gold chain, and the second chariot. The chariot's particularly significant. Chariot technology was introduced to Egypt by way of the Hyksos in the second intermediate period. If Joseph rode in a chariot, the historical setting must either be late Hyksos, early New Kingdom, or if we adopt a Middle Kingdom date, the text is using anachronistic vocabulary for a vehicle, possibly a carriage of some earlier kind. This is one of the points where the early date scheme requires nuanced handling. Hoffmeyer suggests that the Hebrew term Merkava may be a generic term for a state vehicle and not necessarily mean a chariot and pair familiar from the New Kingdom. Others see it as evidence for the late date or the Hyksos placement of Joseph's.
Like us.
What's that?
Like us.
Yeah, like us. That's right. The point is not to dismiss the question, but to recognize that the text detail invites the question. The famine narrative itself, with its 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of of want has authentic Egyptian parallels. The famine stela of Sehel Island, a Ptolemaic period text purporting to record an event in the reign of Djoser, describes a 7-year famine and its resolution. While the stela is far too late to be a witness to Joseph's famine, it preserves an Egyptian literary tradition of 7-year famine, suggesting that such cycles were known and common in Egyptian memory. The biblical narrative centralization of grain storage, taxation in kind, and consolidation of land under royal ownership, Genesis 47:13-26, corresponds to actual patterns of Middle Kingdom and Hyksos period administration. Joseph's family settles in Goshen, Genesis 47, described as the best of the land for shepherds. The location of Goshen is debated, but it's generally identified with the Wadi Tumilat region of the eastern delta, around Tel Adaba. The name Goshen doesn't appear in Egyptian text under that form, but the Septuagint renders it Gesem of Arabia, suggesting an area of the eastern frontier. The location is consistent with the archaeological picture of Asiatic settlement in the eastern delta during this period. The new king who knew not Joseph, Exodus 1:8. Let's talk about that. The transition between Joseph's favor and Israel's subsequent oppression is in the biblical text the rise of a new king over Egypt who didn't know Joseph. That's Exodus 1:8. The Hebrew expression yakum, arose, can suggest not merely a successor, but a new kind of king, perhaps a new dynasty. Two candidates suggest themselves as the early date scheme. First, the Hyksos themselves. On an early date reading, Joseph rises in the late 12th dynasty, and the family of Jacob is in Egypt during the 13th dynasty and through the Hyksos period. The new king who knew not Joseph might be Ahmose I, the Theban founder of Dynasty 18, who expels the Hyksos and views all Asiatics in Egypt with suspicion. This would account for the rapid shift from favored guests to oppressed laborers. Second, even with the Hyksos period, there could have been shifts between rulers more or less friendly to native Egyptian-aligned Asiatic populations like the Hebrews. The Hyksos were themselves Asiatics, but were not undifferentiated. Political and ethnic distinctions within the broader Asiatic, again, Semitic peoples, category were real. The text does not specify, and we should resist forcing it to. What it gives us is a clear theological reading. The favor enjoyed by Joseph was a kindness of providence, not a permanent geopolitical fact. When the political wind shifted, the children of Israel, Bnei Israel, found themselves vulnerable in a way Joseph's generation hadn't been. The ground for redemption in the biblical telling is laid precisely by this vulnerability, right? Yeah. Okay, so let's set the stage for the story. We've traveled from the pre-dynastic villages of Nakada to the expulsion of the Hyksos, roughly 2.5 millennia of Egyptian history, compressed into
2 episodes.
The forward motion of the narrative now points beyond our scope. The new kingdom that follows the expulsion will produce the great empire builders, Thutmose III, Hatshepsut, Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Seti I, and Ramses II. And somewhere within that imperial age, whether early under Thutmose III's contemporaries or late under Ramses II, Moses will lead Israel out of Egypt. That's the key. We don't know. There's theories. My opinion kind of goes back and forth. A lot of scholars' theories go back and forth and opinions. But it's somewhere in that time. That story belongs to a separate brief, but its beginning is anchored in what we've just covered. So 5 observations are worth carrying forward. First, Egypt was already ancient, very ancient, when Israel collided with it.
Yeah.
Okay? The pyramids at Giza were older when Abraham descended than the Roman Empire is from us today.
Wait, say that again.
So the Great Pyramid and the pyramids at Giza were older to Abraham than the Roman Empire was to us today.
God,
Can you believe that? Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy.
And again, Abraham was at about 2000 BC. So that means they were into the 4th millennia BC.
Yeah, they're 3,000-4,000 years old.
That's crazy to think about. The biblical writers never represent Egypt as new or upstart. They represent as a deep, layered, formidably old civilization. Their refusal to be impressed by it, Their willingness to declare its gods nothing is remarkable for this fact. Okay, number 2. The Asiatic presence in Egypt was real. Asiatic / Semitic presence in Egypt was real, sustained, and well documented archaeologically. The patriarchal and Joseph narratives fit into the pattern of movement. Again, they're nomadic peoples.
Yeah.
Okay, pastoral nomadic peoples. Movement, settlement, and integration that is independently attested in Egyptian text and material culture. We're not dealing with stories that float free of any plausible historical setting. We're dealing with stories whose textures match the textures of their context. Number 3, the Hyksos period is critical to understanding what comes after. Okay, the trauma of foreign rule in the Eastern Delta shaped New Kingdom Egyptian identity. It fueled imperial expansion into the Levant and generated the political climate in which a vast Asiatic underclass in Egypt could be perceived as both useful and threatening. It's kind of their remember the Alamo moment.
Yeah.
Okay. The conditions for both the prosperity of Joseph's generation and the oppression of Moses's are forged here. Okay. Key points. Number 4. Egyptian religion is the principal theological and I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
Egyptian religion is the principal theological system of the early biblical narrative. We have to understand the context. From the cosmogony of Genesis first, compared and contrasted with the Neapolitan, Memphite, and Hermopolitan traditions, to the plagues of Exodus targeted at specific Egyptian deities, to the wilderness rejection of the golden calf, a recognizably Egyptian and Canaanite cult object. Remember?
Yep.
We've talked about that before. The Old Testament does its theology in conversation with Egyptian alternatives. The reader who doesn't know what these alternatives are will miss much of this conversation. So we have to understand the religious context of the Egyptians when we understand the biblical stories. 5th and finally, and we'll come back to those as we go through Exodus in particular. 5th and finally, the biblical narrative places great weight on movement into and out of Egypt as a theological pattern. Abraham goes up, goes down, comes up. Joseph goes down, stays. Jacob's family goes down and is enslaved. Moses leads them out. Each descent is a near death, and each ascent is a kind of resurrection. The land of Egypt becomes, in prophetic and apostolic memory, a type of bondage, and the Exodus a type of salvation. Matthew will exploit this typology in his infancy narrative. Out of Egypt I called my son. Matthew 2:15.
Start in actually 14. And he rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Out of Egypt I called my son.
And he's quoting Hosea 11:1. Hosea himself uses the Exodus as a foundation of Israel's identity. So let's read those.
Right, Hosea 2:14 and 15. Therefore, behold, I will lure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. And there I will give her her vineyards and make the valley of Achor a door of hope. And there she shall answer as in the days of her youth, as at the time when she came out of the land of Egypt. And then 11:1. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. 12:9. I am the Lord your God. From the land of Egypt I will again make you dwell in tents, as in the days of the appointed feast.
No, it's 12:9, and then we'll do 13:4.
13:4. But I am the Lord your God. From the land of Egypt you know no God but me, and besides me there is no Savior.
And there are other places, other prophets do the same thing. The story, whose Egyptian setting we've now looked at, is not a foreign episode in the biblical narrative. It's the formative episode. To read the Joseph cycle without this background is to read it as a family drama with an exotic backdrop. To read it with this background, we read it as the entry of God's covenant family into the most powerful civilization on the earth, the placement of an Asiatic shepherd clan in the heart of an empire whose gods and king claim to embody Ma'at, the cosmic order, and the seeding of a redemption whose pattern will echo through every subsequent act of biblical salvation. So the next chapters of Genesis, beginning with Joseph's elevation and continuing through the death of Joseph in Genesis 50, take place inside the world we've just described. Okay, let's move down to Okay, let's go to... all right, so now let's read again Genesis 39.
Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him. And he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her or to be with her. But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house." Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home, and she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, "This is the way your servant treated me," his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed.
So the Joseph narrative is the longest sustained story in Genesis. It's the most novelistic. Robert Alter has long argued that the Joseph cycle is where the Hebrew Bible most fully develops the techniques of narrative artistry that we associate with prose fiction, where the patriarchal narratives before it are moving episodic flashes. Abraham at Mamre, Jacob at Peniel. The Joseph cycle moves along in careful arcs with foreshadowing, irony, dream, and fulfillment, descent and ascent. Okay. Genesis 39 is the second arc of that movement, and it's the one in which the entire moral architecture of the cycle is set. Okay. Genesis 37 ends with Joseph sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard. Genesis 39:1 picks up with that line, and the careful reader notices something striking. Between 37 and 39 stands chapter 38. We had an episode on Judah and Tamar, right? The narrator interrupted Joseph's descent into Egypt with what looks like a digression. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
On the surface. It's not. Genesis 38 and 39 are deliberately juxtaposed. Okay? So Alter, Sarna, Waltke, Wenham are unanimous. Genesis 38 and 39 are designed to be read together. Okay? Two brothers, Judah and Joseph, are in parallel. Judah, and we will, so I'm going to call my shot just a little bit here. We're going to come back to this exact thing we're going to talk about here. Because at the end of Genesis, when Jacob blesses Joseph, okay, we're going to talk about something mind-blowing. And we're going to talk about the messianic line through Joseph. Okay? When we think of the Messiah and the messianic line, we think of the Davidic covenant, and we should.
Yeah.
Jesus is the son of David, right?
Yeah.
But he's also the son of Joseph. And the prophetic literature points to Ephraim and Joseph as also elements of the Messiah. That Messiah is going to be, we talked about the Melchizedek. He's both priest and king, but he's got dual attributes from the Davidic line and from the Joseph Ephraim line.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about that. It's really important that a lot of people don't really talk about. But if you want to understand prophetic scripture, prophetic revelation of the Messiah, we believe was fulfilled in Jesus, then we have to go into that. So this point right here, we're going to come back to, okay, at the end of Genesis. All right, we'll have at least one episode about that, okay? A fascinating book that I read that we'll talk about. Okay. Judah is the older of the two leading sons. Okay. Into Canaanite literature, he marries a Canaanite. He goes into Canaanite culture, marries a Canaanite, fails to act with covenant fidelity towards his daughter-in-law Tamar, has intercourse with what he believes is a cult prostitute, and is publicly exposed as morally compromised. Joseph, the younger, is hauled down into a foreign land against his will, refuses the sexual advances of his master's wife, and is publicly accused of as morally compromised, even though he's innocent. So the biblical narrator is doing something deliberate here. Where Judah falls into sexual sin in his own land, Joseph rises above sexual sin in a foreign land. Where Judah's seal, cord, and staff become the evidence of his guilt, Joseph's garment becomes the false evidence of an alleged guilt that's not his. Judah is recognized by what he leaves behind and is shamed. Joseph is misrecognized by what he leaves behind and is justly imprisoned. The two chapters are mirrors held up to each other. And that means Genesis 39 is not simply a story about temptation. It is, but it's not just that. It's about what kind of son Joseph is and what kind of seed will preserve the line. Okay? So Burnett, in a dialogue with Heiser, talks about this. Burnett's research into the Second Temple Jewish traditions about Abrahamic seed, the seed that would inherit the nations of the world, emphasizes that the patriarchal narratives are not random episodes. They're slow, careful preservation of a line through which the promise of Genesis 12, 15, and 17, that's the Abrahamic covenant passages, will be carried forward. Joseph in Egypt is not just an immigrant doing well in a foreign land. He's the carrier of the seed of Abraham into the territory of other gods. That last phrase is critical, and he will return to it again and again, okay? So when we go back to, again, our Deuteronomy 32, 8, 9, Deuteronomy 32 worldview, preserved at Qumran in the Septuagint, where the Most High divides the nation according to the number of the sons of God, where Israel is Yahweh's portion. Scholars like Heiser argue that the Old Testament assumes a layered cosmic geography. The nations are under the jurisdiction of those created Elohim. Israel is under Yahweh directly. Okay, Joseph in Egypt is therefore in territory under foreign Elohim. And the entire thrust of Genesis 39 is to declare 4 times in 23 verses that Yahweh is with Joseph there in enemy territory. Okay, this is really super important. Okay. There's really strong theological weight to this claim, okay? It's not just a sentimental promise, okay? No. It's a jurisdictional declaration. It's the gods are the Elohim, the created Elohim, were given a specific place to take care of. All right? It's called cosmic geography. We've talked about this many times, and we will continue to. Okay? When Joseph enters Egypt, he's not in the promised land.
Right.
Okay? The land that Yahweh's covenant gave to Abraham and his descendants. Okay? But guess what? Yahweh ain't bound by geography.
No, he's not.
Because he created it all.
Yep.
So no matter where Yahweh is, which we talked about with Jacob also, he is sovereign over that place as well. And in the story of Joseph and in the story of Moses and the Exodus, we're going to see that this rings true. No matter what those created Elohim want, no matter what the people who worship those created Elohim want, Yahweh is sovereign
under
over
the
all.
rule of
Right?
under the rule of Yahweh.
Really super important. Okay, we can't miss that. Okay. In Genesis 39, so verses 1 through 6 open with Yahweh being with Joseph in Potiphar's house. Okay, verses 6 through 20 form the central narrative of seduction, refusal, and false accusation. Verses 21 through 23 close with Yahweh being with Joseph in the prison. The chapter literally unfolds the moral test inside the divine presence. Okay? So Genesis 39 is the only chapter in the entire Joseph cycle where the divine name Yahweh appears with frequency. In chapters 37, 40, 41, 42, all the rest of them, the narrator overwhelmingly uses Elohim instead of Yahweh, the divine name. Okay? But in chapter 39, Yahweh occurs 8 times in 23 verses. Okay? Sarna catches this immediately and treats it with a major signal. Okay? The narrator is telling us in this chapter of all chapters that covenant-keeping name of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the one acting in the present with Joseph. He's the one preserving the seed through Joseph. The chapter is in this sense the most theologically explicit of the entire Joseph cycle. So we're dealing with a chapter, okay, that's structurally, lexically, and theologically central. It's the fulcrum of the Joseph story. It's the inversion mirror to Genesis 38, right? The demonstration that Yahweh is sovereign even in the territory of the foreign gods. It's the moment where the chosen seed proves itself worthy to carry the promise to the nations. That's what we're going to talk about. Okay. One final observation. The narrative as a whole sits in a canonical conversation with two later. The prophetic literature, particularly Hosea, and the wisdom literature, Proverbs 1 through 9. The prophets will later cast Israel in the role as an unfaithful wife. Hosea will use the language of adultery to describe Israel's covenant failures. Proverbs will personify the call of folly as the seductive woman who pulls a young man towards his death. Genesis 39 is the textual fountainhead for all of this. Joseph, the faithful Israelite in exile, refuses the seductive woman and remains loyal to his master. The chapter is a wisdom narrative before there was a wisdom corpus. It is a prophetic parable before the prophets, and it's a Christological pattern before Jesus. We'll trace each of these threads in turn. With this orientation in place, let's turn to the text, okay? All right, that's the intro.
That's good.
So in the next episode, we will continue the narrative.
We'll actually get into the text.
Get into the text instead of introing everything.
Yeah.
So,
all
right, intro over. Let's dive in.
Perfect.
Coming up next.
Thanks, guys, for joining us, and we'll see you next time as we continue Genesis 39. Have a good day.
Bye, guys.